Right, I think we're live now.
Okay, hey everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter when you're joining us or when you're watching this replay. Thanks for joining us on our webinar about our guide to open source and software development trends. I'd like to take a minute to thank the DDRA for giving us this opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm Naira Hussain. I'm a lead developer advocate from IBM. And what this means is on a day-to-day basis, it's my job to help developers like yourself, whether you're coming in from startups, from open source communities, from universities, clients, or partners to build their applications using open source technologies as well as IBM Cloud. Fawaz, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Nair. Hey, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where and what time you're joining us from. My name is Fawaz Siddiqui, and I'm a developer advocate at IBM. I mainly focus on data and AI, but at the same time, I'm an open source contributor. I contribute to multiple open source events, and including Call for Code, Hacktoberfest, and also some open source projects that are existing on GitHub. And today we have a very interesting session for you, where you can also start with your own contribution, one of our repositories. So yeah, we'll get to that. But Nara, over to you.
Yep, I just want to clarify before we start. This session is more about the impact you can have within open source communities and by building open source software. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to keep this as interactive as possible for the people who are attending live. To get started, we do have a quick survey. So throughout the workshop, feel free to send us any feedback you have through this link. My colleague Fawaz will just post it for you in the chat. Right. So go ahead and let me know in the chat what comes to your mind when you hear the term open source. Right. So many of us might have heard about it, especially if you're a software developer or you're a programming student. It's basically source code designed to be publicly accessible. So it's sort of like it could be peer reviewed, it can be analyzed, whether whatever stage you are in your career. Any software which can be inspected by other developers, and it's available on a platform for you to see and use. That's open source software. What I want to clarify is while it's developed and decentralized and in a collaborative way, and while the source code is available for you to see and use, it's not free to use software necessarily. It's available to use and protected with a license. So while the source code is public, the conditions of its use are protected by the license. So where did it all start? So you can see there's history of open source even in the beginning of the internet. So if you've studied some history about the internet, you would know it started with ARPANET, the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, which was really a bunch of researchers working together on building an advanced network, which was then later peer reviewed with open feedback that led to the internet. So you can see this is where we have the early days and the foundations of open source. So if you're coming from an academia background, you can take the analogy of peer reviewed research. It's similar, but we're applying this concept to software. So what are our benefits? It's definitely cheaper, more flexible, has longevity. You can analyze the source code. You get a massive community that's looking at taking a look at your source code, looking for bugs. It's able to contribute fixes. It's an open source movement. It's a way of working that moves beyond traditional software development lifecycle and production. You definitely have more eyes on your code, more security. The project standards are up to date with the industry standards. And it definitely allows newer contributors to learn and implement and grow their skills while contributing back to the open source community or to the open source project that they're working on. So here are the key tenets or the values of open source. So you start off with transparency, right? All your source code is available for everyone to take a look at and to contribute to. You have peer review from different skill levels of developers in your community. You've got reliability, flexibility, of course, lower cost of development, no vendor lock-in since it tends to be less proprietary, and of course, open collaboration. So here are some popular open source communities you might have heard of. Definitely the house of open source is GitHub. If you're coming from a Mac background, you might have heard of Homebrew. There's the Linux Foundation, Free Code Camp if you're coming in from boot camps and you're learning to code online. There's the Apache Software Foundation, Cloud Native Computing Foundation if you're working more with Docker, Kubernetes, you might have heard of this. Hyperledger Foundation for those who are working with blockchain. So here are some popular open source communities you can get started with. And I'm going to show you a bit about the open source projects you might have heard of through the IBM communities. So you can see accessibility toolkits, equal access toolkits, if you want to ensure that your websites, your systems are highly accessible. You've got Qiskit for quantum computing. You've got some for AI, so open models are easily available to model asset exchange. If you want to ensure that your models are fair and explainable, you've got AI fairness and AI explainability 360. You've got OpenWhisk if you're looking for something more like functions as a service or serverless. So there are loads of projects in IBM which originally might have started off in research but are now open source projects. Another good example is the Open Blockchain project. And some projects outside of IBM you might have heard of are Kubernetes, TensorFlow. Red Hat is also a massive contributor to open source, and you can also see it makes open source enterprise ready. You can take a look at the organizations that contribute to open source every year, and Red Hat is always towards the top. What I do want to what I do want to focus on is about the skills that you build in open source. So we have seen in the recent IDC report on the value of open source services, open source software services, that open source skills are really much highly valued by employers and companies over proprietary skills. So if you're someone who's attending the TDRA Virtual Academy looking to build your skills, you can definitely feel rest assured that if you're growing your skills in open source software, this is rated as equal or better than proprietary software by 94% of respondents. Definitely, open source projects help impress potential employers. This results in better job opportunities and a competitive advantage for your business. You can take a look at the report here at the site ibm.com/open source. And what do you need to do to become a valuable member, a respected member of the open source community? Here are some easy ways to get started. You need to understand the community's personality, how they work. So when you're first getting started, you might be there more as a lurker, trying to understand what are the sort of commits, what's a good first commit for you as a contributor, how often does it take for the people managing the project to review it and merge it into the project. Definitely need to treat others right and with respect. Build small, build trust. So start with a small, good first commit and take it from there. Definitely work with clean, manageable, and tested code. Make sure things are working locally with the whole project before you create a pull request. Have a maintenance plan for the features that you're adding to the project. Get a mentor. This will help you, especially if you're just getting started with open source communities. Try to get a mentor who's already a core contributor on that project. Connect with the community. There's usually Discord groups, there's Slack channels, forums for you to get in touch with the community so you can understand what's a need for the developers or users for that open source project. Know the licenses, so this will help you understand exactly how this project can be used in a commercial way or otherwise. And lastly, share your knowledge with the community. You should be an active contributor back within this community. So even though you might be new, you can still contribute back your knowledge to the community. Next, we're going to go into which topics to focus on. So Fawaz, do you want to elaborate on this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Naira. So, well, it's always not confined to these topics, but these are the topics that open source communities are working on today. So first of all, it's multi-architecture development on basically setting up tiers for your application and coming up with different tiers to actually understand where your application is interacting. So there could be a monitoring and logging tier. There could be a data and AI tier and all of these things. Then there's also thin developer experience. Well, this is something very important these days, right? When you're looking for your experience as a developer, you need to ensure that things are easy and at the same time automated. So this is what thin developer experience works on. Then there's data privacy. There's many data privacy suites in the market right now, and open source, and they're actually backed by open source today. Chatbots, they're very important these days, right? They're the final output when it comes to your data and AI lifecycle, and that's what chatbots are focusing on. Then there's edge computing. Edge computing it's going to be the thing for 2022. So we are almost done with 2021. It was a tough year for all of us, but edge computing is there now, and it's growing. It's companies like Red Hat, companies like IBM, and all of these are actually investing on edge computing to ensure that they're connected to the cloud. And basically, what edge computing is, it's connecting hardware devices to the cloud itself, right? Which are basically zeros and ones, and transferring them to the cloud, making sense out of the data that you get. Then there's DevOps. DevOps is always a growing field. Well, I was reading about NetOps, Net DevOps, and all of these things. This field is always growing, right? Then there's AI fairness. This is the topic of interest. It has been in 2021, and it will be in 2022, and henceforth as well, because it's a new topic in the market. There's active research going on. In fact, one of my researchers also is focused on this section as well. There's cross-platform applications. So there are tools like or languages like Flutter. There's tools like Xamarin that help you provide or actually create cross-platform applications. Well, you have multiple platforms these days, right? You have Android, you have iOS, you have web, you have all of these things. So developers are trying to contribute to each and everything as such. Then there's serverless, deep learning, hybrid cloud. It's always building up, using multiple clouds using multiple clouds for a solution. Maybe you get a piece from IBM Cloud, you get a piece from Azure, you get a piece from AWS, you mix it up, you get something really beautiful upcoming, right? Then there's data intensive computing. Well, this is something very new as well. Not many of you might have heard about it, but data intensive computing is all about using massive amount of computing power, and developers are trying to focus that, hey, this computation is kind of data intensive. How do we make it easier? How do we make it easier for us to understand? So the next slide we'll talk about is why contribute. Well, there are some top reasons that you want to contribute to open source, and for those, they are first of all, it's the easiest way to learn and upskill as a developer. So when I graduated back in 2019 in a computer science degree, I was like, I need to do something out of what is my coursework. And I think that's when I stepped into the open source space. And I was like, hey, this is more interesting than what I've learned before. And I can use what I've learned to actually grow further. So it is for students for looking for real world exposure, excuse me. And basically, this is very important, right? When as students or as anyone, right? Everyone is a student, even today, because we are learning at all times, and you want to have some real world exposure. So, what you do back when you're in the learning phase of things is completely different in what's happening in the real world, and that was a wake up call, right? So you need to be prepared for that, and that's why you need to look for real world exposure, and open source is there to help you with that. Then it presents opportunities for networking, mentoring, collaboration, and research. So this is very important, by the way. So every time I contribute to open source, I get in touch with another developer. Maybe they're continents away from me, but we start talking to each other about so many issues that are going on. And Twitter is growing on this, by the way, right? Where if you share that, hey, I just contributed to maybe, let's say, VS Code, and it basically present that many developers would interact with you there, and actually tell you that, hey, this is an interesting thing, this could be improved. And finally, it's all about the feel good factor. This is very important. Once you contribute to something, it's live. Many people are using it. You're like, hey, kind of contributed to this software that you're using. I feel good about it. So who wouldn't feel good about that? So yeah, these are some of the reasons why you should contribute. So the next thing is, you're gonna ask, where do I start? Well, what are the shared spaces where I can get started with open source, and where does it live? So very simple answers for this. It's a good way to start with browsing on GitHub or GitLab. Well, GitHub is like the biggest repository of open source projects, and like Nara mentioned, some of them like Homebrew. All of these things are residing on GitHub. So Homebrew had a release this morning, and at the same time, a software which we all use is also open source, and that is VS Code. VS Code is completely open source, and it's residing on GitHub, where multiple people contribute. and they release their versions through GitHub. Then there's hackathons like Call for Code. These hackathons actually help you um, create solutions based on open source strategies, and you're actually creating something for the community. And we'll be talking about this a bit more. So during Call for Code and Hacktoberfest, which is the events like Hacktoberfest, Google Summer of Code, Outreachy, what has happened that Call for Code projects were turned into open source repositories where people could start contributing. And we saw a very good reach of developers contributing to these projects and making them better than what they were. And everyone is open to that sort of collaboration, right? You can also start with connecting with people on IRC's mailing list, Zulip, Slack, Twitter, and much more. There's Discord as well. And finally, every single one of these places are an open forum where anyone can participate. So you shouldn't go like, hey, hold yourself back, like, hey, I don't have that much understanding about software development. That's fine. You can try it on yourself, try it by yourself, and then try to contribute to things. So the next part is how to start contributing. Well, there are some top questions that newcomers have, and we want to provide some answers to that, right? So how do you start? Well, find an interesting project, a project whose mission you can relate to. This is very important. You need to ensure that you can communicate with the project, the idea of the project itself. You like the project, because you cannot work on something that you don't like or you don't have an interest, right? So find that first, and then you make the first contact. First contact, as in maybe the first pull request for your contribution, or even connecting with the developers in that community to understand more about that project in case you have any questions, right? Then you need to seek help where it's required. So in case, let's say you are trying to do something and then you have some issues, well, there are people to help you there. Even I help a lot of open source developers, but remember to do your research before doing so, because many people are busy. Many people have other things to do as well. So having your own research is very, very important in this community, because once you have that, people will actually know that, hey, this person knows his thing or their thing, and that way they'll be able to guide you further, right? It's not served on a plate, right? You have to work for it. Find a good first issue to resolve. So every repository has multiple issues, and I'll show you those things. And you can find a good issue to resolve. You resolve the issue, you merge your PR, and then you rinse it, and then you repeat these steps. So it's a cycle, basically. You need to continue with this cycle, and you need to ensure that you are. This will give you eminence as well. So, like I mentioned about eminence, we're going to talk about how to network, upskill, and learn efficiently. Some tips and tricks from working and learning in open source. So first of all, you need to find a balance between familiarity and challenges. You need to ensure that you are familiar with things, and at the same time you go like, hey, I am familiar with this, but these are the XYZ challenges that I have. Then you need to communicate with as many people as possible regarding the project, and also communicate with the relevant people. So there will be people looking at the security aspect of things, security researchers. Then there'll be people who will be looking at the data aspect of it. There'll be people who will be looking at the infrastructure aspect of the solution. So you need to ensure that whatever part of the application you're contributing to, you need to make sure you communicate with those people. Then keep your decision-making process open and welcome feedback. Feedback in the open source community is very open. So you need to ensure that you consider all the feedback that you get and make sure you take the right decision when it comes to contributing. And be very willing to step out of your comfort zone. So I was like, just an example of what I went through is that I graduated with the C++, right? And I wasn't willing to try out different languages. I was like, C++ will be forever, but no, I had to step out of my comfort zone. I started working with JavaScript, with Python, with Java. So be willing to step out of your comfort zone. It's just going to help you more. You know how to conquer different challenges, right? From there, you need to be consistent and you need to stay true to yourself and always have fun, right? It's always a very funny conversation when you're contributing to a project on GitHub, and they interact with you in a very, very nice way. But at the same time, there are some common pitfalls to avoid, and that's in the next slide that we'll be discussing. So it's always wise to learn from the mistakes of others, and I'm guilty as well. I have made some mistakes, and I'll be sharing some of those mistakes in the next slide. So, not following the code of conduct. Well, you need to. Every repository has which is open source, has a contributors.md file, and basically that's telling you your right as a contributor and the code of conduct as well. So you need to ensure that you follow that code of conduct. Not researching before seeking help. Well, you are in a hurry to create a pull request. Really, don't let it carry you. You need to ensure that you are doing your research and you are just not just going there and going like, hey, how do I do this? No, you tell them, hey, I've done this and this and this. My end goal is this, but I'm having these XYZ challenges, right? Then there's not seeking help. Well, you do need to seek help, but do research before seeking help, and don't. It's not like you don't seek help. You need to seek help. It's always there, right? It's very important for you to seek help if you're stuck. Being narrow-minded or arrogant, don't do that in the open source space. That's something really, really bad to do, right? And even in life in general. And it's like it's like a part of your life, right? So make sure you're open to suggestions. Don't, if somebody's telling you something, try to listen to them, try to take their feedback, and then try to work on it, right? Then there's biting off more than you can chew. So this is very important. Don't take up so many pull requests or issues that you can't really fix them. It's just gonna overwhelm you as a person, right? There'll be someone else who can take over. That's fine, but you need to ensure that you are on the right track. You don't overwork yourself, and don't be irregular within your communication. Always communicate. In case you are working on an issue, go like. So what I do is that if I'm working on an issue, by the end of the day, so let's say if I start working on an issue at 10 a.m. in the morning, and I plan to work on it till like 12 p.m. in the afternoon. So during this time frame, whatever I've accomplished, I'll just write it as a comment in the issue itself, and then I'll continue the next day. So with all of these in mind, we are going to start creating our first pull request where you can contribute. So I'll be pasting a link in the chat, which is basically a GitHub repository that all of us can contribute to right now, and I'll show you how to do it. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I'm going to drive you through GitHub and whatever is going on in that space. And then we're going to contribute to one of the repositories that I've created for all of you to actually go ahead and try out things, right? All right, so there you go. My screen is there. This is how my GitHub looks like. In case you're not a part of GitHub, all right, my screen just went. All right, there you go. It's back. If you're not a part of GitHub, make sure that you join GitHub. It's github.com. Just give in your email, and you'll be good to go. So this is my dashboard, and in this dashboard, as you can see, a lot is happening on the side. Oh well, I've contributed to multiple repositories, created multiple repositories as well. I'm just all right. I'm just waiting for the right focus. Okay, and let's see how do things look like. So let's say this is something which I was checking out this morning. And if you read more, you see that every contributor who has worked on an issue, so these numbers right here, they're basically issue numbers. And you can see that developers who've worked on it are actually recognized here, right? So there's an issue with updating to the latest Xcode on 3.1 on Bixer. Then there's bump BR, and all of these things are there. And if you see for any repository, the issues tab, so there are a lot of issues there. So for example, brew command to check architecture support on command line and all of these things. This is just for one repository. If we look at something like call for code, so there's another one that I personally contributed to for call for code, which is truth loop. And if you see that there are multiple issues that are happening, so there's issue towards React, and if you can see, people have tagged their issues as help wanted. So that means that, hey, I still need help. I'm kind of stuck, right? And and it continues. The cycle basically continues, and you can see multiple issues that you can help with. So, for example, let's take mine. One of my issues, if I can find it, it's okay. Issue. Let me see if I can find it. If it's there. Okay, I don't find it, but yeah, basically, let me see if I can see it by any chance. Again, all right, I can find my issue. Let me see if I can find it for you, so I can show you how to try out new things. All right, just give me a second. Create an issue. All right, I'll check the pull request. I think it'll be there. So I would directly create pull requests, which is not a good practice, but yep, there you go. So, for example, in this repository, there was an stale error with duplicate values. There was a greeting action issue. So what I did was I went ahead, contributed to the repository, created a new branch and everything. The branch got tagged, and I would tell them that what is the issue happening, right? And another one is this one, where I've mentioned multiple times on merge. There was a merge conflict, so I mentioned that, hey, the merge conflict is fixed and all of these things. So you see, it's a very communicative platform, and at the same time, you ensure that you are coming on the right things. So this is how it works, and this is something that we'll be doing today, right? So we have a repository for you. It's known as your guide to your first contribution. And I'm going to paste the link in the chat once more. And basically, in this repository, we have a file called as yourcodes.md. And that's where we will be contributing today. So what you're going to do first, right, is you're going to fork this repository. I've mentioned the steps at the bottom as well. So you can follow them in case you are unable to follow. But basically, what you're going to do is we're going to start with forking. So that's the first part. Now, what forking means is that you're getting a copy for editing of the code itself, right? So once you click on fork, it's going to ask where are you planning to fork? Well, it's my own account, so I'm going to go ahead and fork it in my account. Now you see on the repository side of things, let me try to zoom in a bit. Right, on the repository itself, you see that now it has gone to my account, right? Now, one of the best practices during this time is to create a new branch. So what does branching do? Is making sure that you don't mess up any other code that you don't want to mess up, right? You just want to stick to what you're doing and don't interfere with other people's code. It's not a good practice because it's going to mess up things and might break some things in the application itself. So you're going to create a branch. So in the repository, I've mentioned to download the code. You could do that, but you can create a branch here as well. So I'm going to call it patch -1, right? I'm going to go like create a branch patch1 from main, and it's going to create something, right? So now, if you see from the main branch, it has gone to patch1 now. Well, what are these branches? So main branch is something that is there in production, which is running, which is basically the final code, which is there. Patch one is like, hey, I'm editing this XYZ file right there. Maybe you might wanna check it out and see if it can merge with the main branch itself. So what I've done now is I've created the patch one branch, and I have another copy of the repository within this repository and another branch that I can edit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to edit the yourcodes.md file. So basically, in this, it's a very simple what do you say, thing. Wanted to keep it fun, right? Not all talking, but you can add your favorite quotes from any writer or movie, or even a favorite lyric from a song, right? So let me pull up something for myself before I write something, right? Right. So let's say I want to edit now. So I'm just going to click on edit. One more really cool feature of GitHub is that it gives you a built-in VS Code as well. So what you do is go on your repository and just press the full stop button and or the period button, and it'll start loading a full-fledged application or instance of VS Code on the app. It's on the browser itself, so you can directly edit it within the browser, right? So what I'm going to do is edit the yourcodes.md file. I'm gonna grab it from Google. I just googled a lyric
Fawaz, could you zoom
basically.
in a bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Better.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Amazing. Right. So I've opened the file now on an instance of VS Code. You need to press you can do it directly there as well, but I prefer to have an IDE, and so that I can explain to you what a commit message is and all of these things within VS Code itself. So as you can see, I'm on patch one, which is the main branch that I want to edit basically, and I'm gonna write two dot just add this uh, lyric that I just caught up from one of the songs I was listening to in the morning. And I'm going to quote it as well. So I'm going to call it Boulevard of Broken Dreams by Green Day, one of my favorite artists back in the days. So I have added this now, and I'll leave space for y'all to go ahead with things, right? And I'm going to save it. And as you can see, there's a source control version, source control button on the side of GitHub. So every addition you do to your code should be explained really, really well, right? It should have a meaning that what are you trying to do? So what I'm trying to do is just add a quote here. So it's going to be simple, but if you're changing something, you need to ensure you write it well. So I'm going to write adding a song lyric, which I heard in the morning, actually. I heard in the morning. And all you have to do is press the check mark, basically, which means commit. Commit means that it's sending to the repository, right? Now it has been committed. Let's see if we see the code, if we see it here. Yep, there you go. Once we refresh, we see that yourcodes.md has this new file now. Now, I have committed it. I have made sure that that this code is quote, or this lyric is there. It needs to be pushed as a pull request on the repository that I'm contributing to. So I'm going to go to the repository, and the first thing you see is that patch one has had recent changes and recent pushes 1 minute ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on compare and pull request. So just click on that. And as you can see, now this kind of gets tedious for people at times, but what's happening here is that this is your base repository, which is basically where you forked it from, right? Then you are having a main branch where you want to contribute to. And head repository is your own repository itself. So head repository is my repository that I forked, and I have a branch called as patch one where I contributed. So basically that's how that's how things are working, right? Now I'm going to explain. This is the most important part, by the way. You need to explain what are you trying to merge or add to the production environment. So I'm just going to write something really quick. So listen to this song. It reminded me of my school days, and I think it would be an amazing addition to this repository. Right? Done. I've created the pull request now. Now, I'm also the admin for the IBM Developer MEA for the IBM Developer MEA group for on or org on GitHub, so I can see this. But your administrator is going to see something like this, right? Your administrator is going to see that, hey, this person whose name is Fawaz Siddiqui is wants to add something to our repository. They can see the commits, that these are the commits that I've made. These are the files changed as well. And by the way, the more files you change in that patch 1 branch, the more updates are going to come here. So I'll show you an example of that now. So let's say I'm going here and I'm going to open patch 1 again. Just give me a second. Right. And I'm going to add another lyric or something, right? So I'm going to open the web editor and I go, I'm going to add something by, all right, there you go. I'm going to add, it is a beautiful day. And this is by Beautiful Day YouTube Day YouTube, right? So it's also one of my favorite bands. And I'm going to go like adding another sweet line from you too. I create a commit, all right? And now if you can see, if I refresh this, you see I get adding another sweet line from you too. At the end of the day, the administrator is going to do some checks. I don't have any checks deployed here, but they will 100% have some checks to ensure that the merge is not conflicting with anything, and they will just have to, maybe they want to talk to you about something. Hey, this is nice, you know. I will merge soon, and they can connect with you, right? And finally, they will just merge the pull request. And it's going to go like merge pull request from this, adding a song lyrics that I heard in the morning. This can be edited by the administrator. So I can add something. This was a nice start to things, right? And then you do confirm merge, and finally it's been merged. So if you go to the GitHub repository now, and if you see your codes.md file, there are 3 codes that are there already that I've added during this hands-on. And it's a very basic start, but this is how it looks in a general way. But in the real world, it's more complex when it comes to the coding part. But this phase of contributing, it's very simple, very straightforward, and it's very easy to understand, right? Okay. And you can further go ahead and create GitHub actions to make the project easier to deploy. That's the basic idea, right? And it's not only, by the way, open source projects is not only related to just coding. It could be any project, right? And yeah, that's how I'll be, if you are planning to contribute to this repository, I'll be here, merge your pull request so you can have a full essence of things. And now we'll go back to the presentation so that we can talk about some different things that are upcoming. So let me just make sure. let me try to. All right. All
Yep.
right. Let me
Well, we
try to.
switch back to the presentation. I'm seeing some interesting comments in the chat. We're seeing lots of people who are fans of open source, people using it in aerospace, using it to build their AI models with TensorFlow, Keras, PyTorch, transformers, robotic process automation. So I'm really happy to see like such activity within developers in the open source communities.
Yeah, I see that Omnia is doing it in security related projects. Yeah, well, AI in security is growing a lot these days. So this is something very open and very interesting to look at every time in the future. I'm a security graduate myself, so yeah, that's a good space to look at, right? So we've created our pull requests and we've tried out things now. So we have something very exciting for you happening later today. This is very interesting, and the Call for Code awards are happening later today, where basically, as a part of Call for Code, people are developers are going to share the projects that they've been working on. We have a very interesting guest. His name is Colin Jost. He's basically an SNL host. He'll be sharing some developer memes, but at the same time, we'll be announcing the winners for the Call for Code Global Challenge, Call for Code University Challenge, Regional Challenge, and the PTech and BGC Challenge winners as well. This way, you can get started with Call for Code next year. Call for Code happens every year. It's throughout the year. And we're going to launch the 2022 cohort in around the February to March timeframe, I believe, right? This is usually changing, but it's a very good way to interact with people from different countries to actually build up projects. And having a diverse team is very important, and this is what it's focused to. So my colleague will be sharing the link to attend it later today. It's I think it's around 7 o'clock UAE time. So, but yeah, there's a pre-show and then there's a main show. So make sure you try to be there as much and try to see how people have grown to use open source projects, right? Some of the useful resources that I want to share as well is some of the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So it's the Red Hat R community contributions. So Red Hat is always big on their community. You can check out their community. You can also check out ibm.com/open source. You can see some open projects. There's the Linux Foundation, opensource.org, and you can also sign up and log into IBM Cloud and try out different projects that you could do for your open source project. So let me share that in chat. I hope it comes out right. I really hope it does. No, it doesn't. It's crossing. Let me just share my link. Hold on. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, we are more than happy to answer them. So loop in your questions. I believe as open source contributors, even contributors have some really big questions. So shoot us your questions and we'll be more than happy to answer them in chat or here itself now. So yeah, and do let us know how we did with this presentation. It was a pretty quick one, but at the same time, I believe we hit the right essence, right? So I'm going to be sharing the link to this survey to let us know how we did. And now we are open to questions, and we'll be monitoring the chat as well to ensure that we answer all your questions that you have, and also rectifying anything that you've been working with or having chat on within as well. So I see that Fatma, what I love about open source is that free to use, distribute, and modify. Also, in the huge community always encourages us. Yes, that is the main fact, that it is kind of free to use, but not always free to use. It's protected with a license. You need to ensure that you're using it in the right method, in the right way. So yes, it is free to use, but make sure that you don't make sure you don't use it in the wrong way, right? So can you tell us about the winners in the previous call for code? Well, there was one winner from the Middle East and Africa, and they worked on a really cool project basically, and they got some really good cash prices for it, and all of this. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
it's
maybe
basic.
I can elaborate on this. So
Yeah,
there are different levels of winners. There's of course the grand prize winner who gets $200,000 US dollars as the cash prize. They get support from the Linux Foundation, so their project becomes an open source project along with the likes of Node.js or Hyperledger, for instance. So you become as famous and you get that kind of support for your open source project. And your project will also be deployed to a community or a city or a country-wide level to the community that needs it the most, right? So last year in 2020, the challenges were around climate change as well as COVID-19. So the climate change winner was a company called Agroli. They helped farmers better understand the impact on climate, manage their resources, and provide tailored information to farmers based on location, crop type, and stage of growth. The one before that was around natural disasters. So I think it was a team called Prometeo that supported firefighters. So it was actually having sensors within the firefighters' outfits that helps monitor their vital signs when they're out in the field and be able to call them back or support them when they need the support. So there are many types of awards. So of course there's the global award, then there's runners up. They also get a cash prize and support. And then you also have the regional finalists. So, like Fawaz was saying, we have regional finalists who get a cash prize of $5,000 from the Middle East and Africa.
right. Thank you so much, Nara. And we also have a question regarding the open source licenses. So if I can get to share my screen, I have a list of open source licenses that we can talk about and share. Thank you. So basically, there's an academic free license. There's GNU. Apache is really big. Then there's artistic license, BSD, 2 simplified license. Then there's BSD 3, clause, clear license, clause, new revised license, and boost and Creative Commons. There's more licenses, by the way, right? But basically, the idea here is if they're open for commercial use, if they're open for distribution, they're open for modification or patent use, private use. They need if they need a disclosure source, if the network you use is distribution, state changes, liability, trademark use, and the warranty. Open source doesn't really have warranty, right? You are responsible for maintaining it. So these are some of the licenses and the way these licenses revolve around the project itself. Um, and Khawla, I see that you have also posted a question. I'm relatively new to open source, and I was wondering if one should have a certain level of experience to be able to do pull requests. Well, I mentioned this in the start, but the clear answer is no. As soon as you see that you can contribute to something. Now, contribution doesn't really mean that you have to just contribute code. That's a very um, that's that's what developers these days usually think. They're like, hey, I don't have that much experience in code. Should I still contribute? Well, you should. There's multiple ways you can contribute to the documentation of a software that you've used, right? And basically explain further to people that hey, these are the uh, these are the implications of this software. Maybe you're trying to explain the deployment strategy, you're trying to explain the scripts, maybe you're trying to maybe you're trying to make the instructions easier to understand. You'll be helping people a lot because in that way, because once you edit the documentations, let's say for example, if I'm working on something, the first thing I would do is I would go to the documentation to understand how to install it, to understand the syntax, to understand the parameters I need to provide. And if you edit those, it'll be actually really helpful for developers to understand what they want to do and what they have to do to get started. It would also nice to talk about open source security. Well, open source security is it's a very distributed and decentralized system, right? There are multiple security researchers today in the market, and they're contributing to multiple projects. Now, when you look at the security aspect of open source, why is it actually considered to be more secure than proprietary software? Is because there are multiple people looking at the project. So maybe I see something that is wrong with me, with one of the input forms or one of the architectures that actually allow us to do SQL injections. I would fix that. Then there'd be someone else who figures out something else. So open source projects, because when it comes to proprietary softwares, it's basically uh, it's very simple. It's just one organization trying to ensure that it works well, right? But when it comes to an open source project, it's not an organization, it's no one, it's multiple people looking at the project. So your software would be more secure when it comes to open source than a proprietary software itself. So I hope that answers the open source security question. Does anyone have any further questions? Naira, would you like to highlight anything?
Nope, that's about
No?
it. Just on our last slide, we have our contact information. So if anyone has any questions about open source or how you can contribute, call for code, getting started, feel free to reach out to us. Fawaz has a Linktree link, so you can contact him on all social media. For me, you can contact me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I will put these links in the chat.
All right. Thank you so much. It was a really good morning session. And really stay safe and take care.
Yep. Thanks, Fawaz. Thanks again to the TDRA for giving us this opportunity, and it was lovely speaking to you all today. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Have a good day, y'all.